Joanna, live from Kids in the House. Today we're covering a very important topic, transgender kids. And I'm so honored to have with me Joanna and Aidan. I want to read your titles because I'm from Sweden. Joanna Olson-Kennedy, MD, Medical Director of the Center for Trans Youth, Health and Development at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. And Aidan Olson-Kennedy, Executive Director of the Los Angeles Gender Center.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks you for being here today. So, what do you think are the most important topics for the transgender kids today? How have they been affected by this political climate?
I think in my practice, what I've seen is a lot of fear. I think that there's a lot of concern about not knowing what's going to happen. And so I think with recent things that we've seen, the rolling back of the sort of executive directive around protecting trans youth in schools and using appropriate gender facilities, to have that from the top person in our nation say, we no longer actually recognize that protection, we're going to leave that decision making to states, puts people into a significant and understandable state of anxiety about what that's going to mean for them on an everyday basis. I think that the piece that we don't often think about is related to what happens when people get permission to discriminate. And that's really what this is. It's permission to discriminate from the highest levels of power in this country. And even though maybe the legal ramifications are not quite known yet, or people don't know exactly what's going to happen, what it does say is, okay, people in America, feel free to discriminate because we're doing it at the highest levels and we're showing you how to behave with bad modeling. And that's actually probably more dangerous for people on the ground.
And I had the opportunity to sit down with some transgender children. And one thing I didn't realize is what a profound thing this thing of going to the bathroom. Two of these kids told me that they hold going to the bathroom the whole day, which kind of really broke my heart. It's a very profound issue. So we're actually going to talk to some parents and see if you can give them some advice. So let's hear it from our first parent.
Hi, I have an 8-year-old daughter who she's a gender non-conforming child, and I'm a single dad, and I'm just reached a brick wall. I don't know what to do to help her. She wants to be a boy. She doesn't relate at all to being a girl, and I'm wondering what treatment I could introduce to her, or who I could talk to help her with the situation, and if maybe no treatment is needed, if maybe it's just a phase that she's going through. Is there any chance that she might change her mind as she gets older? Just any assistance would definitely help the both of us make our lives easier. Please, please help me.
Thank you so much for coming on camera and asking your questions. Your question, or questions actually. And I'm going to turn it over to you guys. What advice can you give this dad?
I think as a mental health provider, I would advise that both he and his child get connected to safe places to sort of talk about and look at what's actually happening. You know, it's not uncommon that parents express concern or hesitancy of, well, what if this is a phase and what if they change their mind? And being able to have a place to like really talk about that and really work through that, that maybe is a possibility, and there's something happening right now that also needs to be addressed. And we can't get too caught up in like, well, what does 5 years look like? Because something's happening right now. And then, you know, being able to connect him, because it's clear that he has a lot of emotion, he has a lot of concern, and he clearly loves his child. And so getting him connected to supportive environments with other parents who have trans kids and support groups would be most valuable. And so being able as a mental health provider, providing that space to him, providing that space to that young person, and helping him arrive at the place that there is a possibility that he has a transgender son, and that's a really great and okay thing, that it doesn't have to be a bad outcome.
And Joanna, what are some of the medical treatments a transgender child would go through if what are the different treatments?
Yeah, I think it's really important for folks to understand that before anyone starts puberty, we don't do any medical intervention. It's not warranted, it's not necessary. All kids before they start puberty don't really have any appreciable amounts of hormones, sex steroid hormones in their bodies. So medical intervention at that point in a child's life is not really considered or useful. Once kids do start their puberty process, which is different varying times for kid to kid, there might be an indication to maybe put that person's puberty process on hold, or maybe not. And a lot of that has to do with where that child is and having those conversations and really being able to understand, are they in distress about the idea of going through the puberty their body would dictate, or
But
are they not?
the puberty is to give more time, stopping the puberty is to give more time to make a choice about the transition?
I think there's a lot of reasons that people might put their puberty on hold. And some of them have to do with that. If somebody needs more processing time, the family needs more processing time, the young person, if that young person's starting puberty at 8 or 9, which is a really young age, it's not appropriate for them to go through a different puberty at that age. That they need to be more peer concordant, so there's some developmental differences as well. But it really does free that person from being overwhelmed and distressed by going through the wrong puberty, if that's what's happening, to be able to have that processing time. If you're going through a puberty that is causing you such an enormous amount of distress, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to participate in that process very clearly. So puberty blockers can be a really big benefit for young people, but for an 8-year-old, it's probably unlikely that they've started puberty yet. I can't say this enough, that parent support is so critical for the health and well-being of all young people, but we know we've seen this over and over again in gender nonconforming and trans youth, that it is the #1 predictor of healthier outcomes. So the fact that people are seeking help and care and want answers or help is really important, because we know that parents in general love their kids and they want to do the best by them, and supporting your kid and maybe taking some of the gravity away from what your kid is wearing and what name or pronoun they're using. We put a lot of gravity onto it, and there may not be that much gravity for us. For the young person, it's really important, but for us, all of that is reversible.
And I would add just really quickly, at 8 years old, like Joe said, that there's probably not medical intervention necessary, but facilitating and supporting and helping that young person, what we call socially transition, may be the best thing that can happen. And so being able to change outward appearance to make it more congruent with potential internal identity. And so being able to walk in the world, whether it's this child or other children, being able to walk in the world and be seen through clothes and hair and names and pronouns in a way that is congruent with how you identify internally is really, really important. And most of us would be able to understand the horrific discomfort if any of us walked around and people interacted with us in an incongruent way with our gender. Like, that would be disruptive to our life. And so for kids that age and anyone who's transitioning, social transition can be a really important part.
And we feel like you are really wanting to do the best for your child. We really hear that. I hope this was helpful. Our last question for you, I was thinking about. So what, the hormone shots, what happened? That would be the next step after stopping puberty, right?
So for many young people that go on blockers to suppress or halt or delay their puberty, most of those young people will go on to take hormones that bring their body into better alignment with their gender identity. But not all. But the vast majority of them do, and that would happen later on after they'd been suppressed for a little while, but some of that depends on when they enter into care, their chronologic age when they're blocked, and their developmental process. It's really important that people understand the best approach to this care is that it's individualized and that it's tailored to that young person's physiologic development, chronologic development, but also their own needs and their own process as they move forward.
Great. I hope that was helpful for you. So if you like this show, please support Kids in the House by getting a subscription. And next, we're going to get to meet an incredible lady. Her name is Isabella Rose, and she wrote a letter to Ivanka Trump that actually went viral. And so we welcome Isabel. Are you there? So we're here with Isabella Rose, who is a parent of a transgender child and wrote the most incredible letter to Ivanka Trump that really touched me deeply. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about the story of how you come to realize that you had a transgender child?
Well, first of all, my son, when my child was who we thought was our son, he always wanted to play the game mermaid from a very young age, and my husband would say, Samuel, why don't you play Aquaman? And Sam had no interest in playing Aquaman, and I typed into the internet, my little boy likes mermaids, and there were about 800 pages of links to the fact that many transgender boys fixate on mermaids at a young age. So I had this inkling in my head, oh my, this could be a possibility. And I kept myself open-minded. But over the next few years, Samuel, every night at bedtime, would cry in my arms and say, Mommy, I am a girl kitty. I am a girl Quetzal was very big. He had an ABC book. There was an animal for every letter in the alphabet, and Q was Quetzal. That's how I know what a Quetzal is. So he said, Mommy, I'm a girl Quetzal. I'm a girl lynx. And I would say every night, Samuel, I love you if you're a girl Quetzal or a girl lynx or a boy Quetzal or a boy lynx. I love you any which way you are. Until it came to the point where through his sobbing, he literally was tearing at his own body in hatred, in extreme hatred. And around this time, he refused to look in the mirror. And he also, at this time, he was 4 years old. He told both myself and my husband that he wanted to burn his face off.
Oh.
And there's no parent that can hear their young child have such self-hatred with no real cause that we could understand other than the gender. We had to pay attention. Yeah.
And so what was your journey after that? How did you, where did you go from there?
I went to my first stop, and the stop I hope anyone who's listening to this will take it, was to a professional. I went to more than one gender professional, and I got more than one opinion. And the Gender and Family Project at the Ackerman Institute, which is headed by an extraordinary gentleman named Jean Melpa. He's Belgian and gracious and gentle and calm. He helps my husband and I through it. And he met Samuel and helped Samuel. And Jean never impressed anything upon Sam or upon me and my husband. And he said, watch your son and listen to your son and take your guidance from your child. And so we did. We waited and watched and tried to relieve any major sadnesses by unconditional love at all times. And eventually our child expressed a desire to present as a girl, and we allowed it.
You are an incredible mother.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being on. Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Every child should be so lucky to have her as a mother, right?
Yes.
She seems incredible. So we are actually going to now hear from another parent who would like to get guidance from you.
Firstly, thank you for hearing me out today. This is in regards to my son. I really don't know what to say. I didn't know how to approach the situation when it first came up. And my wife, who I looked on to for support, doesn't seem to understand where I'm coming from. So my son, he enjoys dressing up like a girl. It's something I'm not used to. It's something I haven't experienced myself, so I don't know if it's a phase or not. And it's hard because this is a very crucial time in his life, and I feel like a man or even a boy should carry himself so that he goes in the right direction, basically. But it's not that I don't love him. I don't want him to hate me. I would just like some advice, please.
Thank you so much for being so brave and coming on here today and asking this question. I know it wasn't easy for you. And what's do you have to say to this dad here?
I really appreciate that this question has come up because it comes up very, very commonly, especially when I have families with very young kids that come in seeking information and advice. One of the biggest things that people ask is this a phase? And I think the reason people ask that is because it is for a lot of kids. This is really common for boys to have a period of time in their childhood when they want to dress up, specifically around dress up. There are some things that may differentiate kids. There's been very, very little data published about this, but I do think that this concept of boys wanting to wear dress-up clothes, specifically in the context of their homes or maybe in preschool, and a lot of times that goes away. It goes away over time. And one of the differentiators is kindergarten, because in preschool there's a dress-up box. It's available, it's commonly done, kids dress up a lot. It's when kindergarten comes along and there's no more dress-up box, and one of the saddest things that happens is there's a lot of very, very strong cultural messages about how to do boy correctly and how to do girl correctly. And so sometimes kids who might not have moved out of that phase stop that because they feel a lot of pressure. I think it's really, it's important to listen to your child and try to figure out if your child is having distress. I can't emphasize this enough, because usually kids who want to dress up and they are allowed to dress up either at home or even when they're going out or in the context of school, they don't have a lot of distress. Sometimes there'll be problems if people make comments or they get weird looks from people, but that distress that comes with gender dysphoria is not alive and well with them, and it goes away. And so I think the question of, is there harm in letting your son wear girls' clothes for some period of time in their life? No. And I think that's a really important piece for people to understand. If a young child starts to talk more and more about, it's not about dressing up, it's about wearing girls' clothing, regular girls' clothing that girls would want to buy and wear, what we say is typically assigned to girls, that's a little bit different scenario, but we would have to know so much more about an individual child specifically. Go ahead.
There's something that really stood out for me when you had said that a desire for your son to move forward in the right way. I'm paraphrasing, so I'm sorry if I didn't get that correct exactly. I think it may be valuable to think about all of us. We all have our own individual right way that doesn't maybe map exactly the same as someone else's right way, and that you have a young human who is having some experience with something that you're noticing and you're observing, and that's part of what is causing concern for you, because it's clear that you're very concerned about the well-being of your child now and the well-being of your child in the future, and maybe being open to the possibility that what seems like the right way for you may not end up being the right way for your child. And what's going to be really important is that whatever the right way is for your child, that he knows that at the end of the day you have his back, that you're in his corner, even if that path seems really incongruent to what makes sense to you, and even if it makes you feel very uncomfortable and very uncertain and even scared. It's going to be so crucial that if your young person is going into a scary world, that he's not coming into a scary house. And that means sometimes we have to put our own discomfort as parents a little bit behind to make sure that our kids feel as safe as they possibly can. And I would advocate the same thing that I would to any parent experiencing these things, is that it could be very beneficial for both you and your kid to get into some positive therapy support, because whatever's happening for your kid is not happening in a vacuum. You're obviously being impacted, and that's important to understand as well.
I hope that was helpful. And I want you to know that this was a very common question we got. So I appreciate you coming on camera and asking it. And next, we're actually going to meet a parent and kid who both transitioned. The daughter first, and then the parent. Eric, were you inspired by Corey to also transition? How did that all come about? Because I know that Corey, you transitioned first, right?
Yes. So I saw the Jazz Jennings video and learned what being transgender meant. And my first thought was, I think that might be my child. Let me let her watch this show and see what she thinks and what her words are. And then my second thought was, this actually is myself as well. But I had to focus on my child and think about her first before I could even consider my own transition. And watching the courage and the bravery that she had to face the world with so many obstacles and so much negativity thrown her way, it inspired me tremendously to start my own transition. I thought, oh my gosh, this child can endure this. That bravery just, it awed me. It was just so amazing that it definitely gave me the strength and inspiration to start my own transition.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And how do you deal with the negativity?
You know, we look at the negativity as people that are just uneducated. And we just, honestly, we ignore it. We don't read the comments in any of the sections, the comment section in any public article, because it's just too hurtful, and we don't need that kind of negativity in our lives. We understand that there is going to be negativity. We understand that there are going to be uneducated people, but we don't let it get to us. Yeah, we don't let it get to us, and we just look at it as, those are just more people that we need to educate, and we need to try to maybe open their hearts and minds.
Is there any other advice that you'd like to give to transgender children or transgender parents out there?
I want to say, if you're a kid going through a hard time and you're transitioning and your parents don't accept you, just believe in yourself. You don't need anybody else if you can't find anyone else. But if you want to find somebody else, go through a therapist, go through something else. But if you're also a parent, educate yourself, find out what it means before you jump to conclusions. And that's my advice.
I really, really enjoyed meeting you and talking to you, and I think you gave us some great insight for families out there. And I know you have a very busy schedule, so I appreciate you taking the time.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. We covered a lot about younger children today, but most transgender children come forward when they're teens, or is that true?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's really important to understand that even though we have so much more increased visibility of young trans children talking about gender, coming out to their parents in childhood, it's still the case that most people are accessing care in adolescence or adulthood. And that's really important because there's a lot of things that go into somebody's journey of gender identity and understanding that and how to talk about it. And for many, many people, it doesn't happen until around puberty or right after puberty or later. And so that's really important for people because a lot of times when these stories of younger kids are so prominent, parents have trouble understanding why their child wasn't talking about their gender in early childhood.
And is it more difficult to do the transition if it's later?
I think that's a hard question to ask. I mean, to answer. I don't know if it was hard to ask, but I think that's a complex question because there are physiologic reasons that taking hormones earlier are sometimes advantageous. But I think there are cognitive capacities that are better when people transition older. So it's a double bind, right? So there's benefits to taking hormones in early adolescence because you have more hormone receptors and you get to live your life longer in a physical space that feels better for a lot of people. But if you start this process when you're very young, your gender barometer becomes more sophisticated as you get older, which doesn't mean your gender changes, but your capacity to talk about it and understand it and know how you want to wear it is more sophisticated as you get older. It's definitely been shown in data, though, that when people access services at a younger age and they get access to those services, that's very beneficial for them.
I think the other thing that is valuable to think about is that people who are accessing transition in early mid-teenage or even young adult into adulthood is that there's experiences that are happening because they're negotiating and navigating different systems than when you're a younger child. And so one of the things that I work a lot with in my practice is folks who are experiencing gender dysphoria in the very concrete sense of discomfort with secondary sex characteristics, but a lot of discomfort I sort of call like gender dysphoria noise. We talked about earlier, like trying to figure out how to go to the bathroom and how to not drink liquids for 8 hours to negotiate those spaces. Or, you have secondary sex characteristics, so how are you gonna hide, if you identify as male, how are you gonna hide chest tissue? How are you gonna negotiate locker rooms and voices and dating? This is like a sentinel thing when you're a teenager in high school, is negotiating dating. And so thinking about, if you're not able to access transition-related services or care during that time, there's all of these other things that are happening, these microaggressions, that is also then impacting the psychosocial well-being of young adults, which often looks like depression or anxiety or OCD. And then frequently those young people are then prescribed medications to try to treat the depression and anxiety when the treatment actually needs to be organized around the gender dysphoria. So I think that's something else that needs to be thought around. Delaying intervention and delaying care is, yes, there's the well, what if they change their mind? And, we could have a very long, detailed conversation about that at some point. But again, I sort of want, that talking about there's something happening right now that is significant, and we don't want that young person to get sent on a trajectory that is negative health outcomes for them.
How often do you see a child change their mind?
I'm trying to think of even how many. The question is not the correct one. It's not about changing your mind. I think people have an idea when they either are not trans or they don't work with trans folks that at some point you made a decision about your gender, but that's not really what happens. People are born with their gender. Nobody's making a decision about their gender. They're making a decision about what to do with it if it doesn't match their assigned sex at birth. And so because of that, I think if we reframe the question to be how many people make decisions to stop interventions, medical interventions, it's also a very, very small number, especially once people reach adolescence. So this is pretty consistent across the Dutch data and across the anecdotal experiences of most of the specialized gender clinics in the United States, that very, very, very small numbers. Like people can point to a handful. So we have about 850 trans kids in our program, and probably 3 to 5 have made a strategic decision not to either pursue hormones after blockers or to discontinue hormones after they started using them.
So one question I got on our website was, I'm transgender and my parents doesn't approve. What do I do?
I think the situation of an unsupportive family is an incredibly common and difficult one. And much of what a young person can do around resiliency in that scenario is dependent on where they are physically and geographically located. So I think the situatedness is so important. Is that a young person who's heavily resourced, they have the capacity to get to, they have an existing support group or something local that they can get to? Is there a GSA within their own school that they can tap into? Is there an adult in their life? Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's a person in their religious community, maybe it's a therapist, who they can actually look to for support for this improving their outcomes. Again, it's not necessarily only a parent who can provide that positive space for young people, but any adult, and that's been linked to good outcomes. So trying to identify who is potentially going to be supportive or could be supportive for that young person. But I also think it's important, and it is true that a lot of parents start out very confused and maybe angry and upset. But many parents don't end up there. They move, and so what's difficult about adolescence is maybe you're not having a great understanding that people can move. And this is, I can 100% say that the way that parents react when their kids come out to them the first time is seared into the brains of these young people. And so it's often a place where parents go, I wish I could take that back. I wish I could have done something differently. But even though that memory is seared there, parents can do a lot of work to move. And if that's possible, that's the best scenario, because you do need that parental support to access care. So really identifying, and oftentimes young people can, when they go through this process of thinking about it, identify a family member or somebody, another adult in their life who can help support them, but also be their advocate with their parents.
Great advice. And with that, I would like to invite another expert, another incredible expert. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Erin Saft, one of the foremost experts on transgender kids. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you, and thanks for having me here.
Well, last time you were on Kids in the House, you had one book out, Gender Born, Gender Made. But since then, I heard you have another book out.
Yes, I have now the sequel to that book, so we'll do show and tell. And I have this book
funny.
called The Gender Creative Child.
And I'm
that is a new book that just came out in 2016.
I'm looking forward to reading that one. I got a question on the website today that kind of really touched me. It was a young person asking, how do you come out? How do you tell the world that you're transgender?
It's a question that is such a common one. And it's why it's so important that I do the work that I do, is to develop safe spaces so people can come out. So there's a couple of steps. In answer to this young person's question, the first thing is you have to come out to yourself. You have to sort out who you are. And that's the most important thing, because you're the arbiter of that. Nobody can take that away from you, no matter who you tell or don't tell. So that's step one. And it sounds like this person's already there. And the next step is, who do I want to share it with, if anyone, and how to do it? So the important journey stepping forward is figure out the safest place first. Find somebody who you feel really safe with, and that's usually the first person or people to come out to, and build from there. And then they can flank you and be your support when you tell the next tier and the next tier. For some kids, that might be everybody at once. For another person, it might be the special person, teacher at school. It might be their family doctor. It might be their mom. It might be their other mom. It might be a dad. It might be their other dad. But that's the most important thing, that you start out feeling comfortable to open up and share. And there may be nobody you feel comfortable with, so you want to just build up what I call scaffolding around you, which might include going to a support group first, to hear other people's stories and hear how they handled it, and then go forth.
It sounds like a really good plan, actually. Now, I would actually like to roll the camera with a question from a parent for you.
Hi, I have a question about my daughter, Frankie. She's in first grade. For a very long time, she has insisted upon wearing boys' clothes. That's just what she prefers. She likes her hair cut very short, and she wants to dress as a superhero, not the girl superheroes, the boy superheroes for Halloween. She's just naturally always gravitated toward more masculine things. And my question is, when do I talk to her about this? So far, everything's been okay at school, but I'm a little concerned as she gets older. She might run into some problems with other students. I want to know how I should handle this. Should I wait for her to talk to me, or should I bring it up with her? I don't know if she's possibly transgender, if she's gay, if this is something that'll change as she gets older. But I just want to make sure that I'm supporting her the best way I can.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. And I think there's many parents are in the same situation like you. So would love to hear what Dan has to say to you.
So these are wonderful questions, and absolutely right. There's so many parents who have the same question, and it's actually harder when your kid's doing just fine, because if it's not broken, don't fix it. And let your child be who they are, and basically skip through the tulips, being happy about how they've chosen to put their gender together and express their gender. There is the concern of thinking forward to what I call building gender resilience. Like, what if a problem does come up? You want your child to be prepared. And also, you want your child to know that if they do want to talk about it, it's okay to talk about it. So what I would say in this situation is to think of it as general education and value sharing about all kids. So for example, just bringing in picture books about the rainbow of genders and all the different ways people like to do their gender. And there's lots of really good kids books about that now. And just have those to read together. And then if your child wants to ask questions or says, hey, that's like me, and you say, yeah, that's like you. And the most important thing is that you mirror back to the child, and we love that about you. That's a wonderful thing about you. And then if it turns out that somebody else is giving them a hard time, and you can answer that question by asking the teacher. So doing some behind the scenes work. Do you notice anything at school? Because your child may not tell you. And if they do notice, well, somebody's not being very nice to her, saying, are you a boy or are you a girl? Then you can step in and help your child build what I call a psychological gender toolbox, so that they're prepared to be able to answer those questions in a positive way and think of it as an educational moment. For example, to be able to say to a kid who asks that, I guess you don't know that people can dress any way they want. It's people clothes. And these are the kind of clothes I like to wear. Now, if this child is not transgender, but just likes to wear those clothes and say, yeah, I'm a girl, and this is the way I dress. It might even be that in that toolbox, that child may come to say, actually, I'm a girl boy, or actually, I'm a boy. So we don't know that yet about this child, but we want to make sure that that child is free to speak up once they know who they are and knows how to help other people who don't understand. It's not their job to educate the world. It's mostly their job to have tools to help themselves feel comfortable in the world, and also to know adults to go to if they're having a problem with it. So I think this mom is going to do fine just because she's asking the questions.
Yes,
she's
I
already
agree.
said she's thinking about her child in a wonderful way.
Yeah, you do seem like a great mom for asking. I totally agree with you. Diane, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today. And we learned so much in this little conversation, actually. And would you just say your website so people can know how to get a hold of you?
Probably the best thing is to go to my website, which is www.dianearensaf.com.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Thank you, Diana. And now I want to ask you, what happens when a child can't afford treatment or a family can't afford treatment because it's expensive, or they might have to travel to a place where they can get the resources to get help?
I think that families not being able to access care is really common. It might even be more common than families who are able to access care. Some of that has to do with the fact that there's just not enough competent and available care for trans youth. There are, like, for example, in my clinic at Children's Hospital, we have people that come from Alaska and people that come from Hawaii and all over the country. But that would require a lot of resources for someone to be able to do that. And that's not most people's situation, and nor should people have to do that. But I do think it's probably quite common that people are not able to access care for a variety of reasons. And it becomes a problem without a great answer. I think that people can seek support in some of the ways that we've talked about up until now, but I think when it comes down to medical care, that's a different scenario. And in a state like California, where we have made it not legal to deny care related to gender, it's less of a problem, because this has been one of the things about the Affordable Care Act that has helped our community so much, is that people having access to Medi-Cal here in California has given them access to care related to gender transition. For people who live in other states, that's not the case, and there is a myriad of situations that come up where if there is care available, it's not covered by insurance. Blockers are incredibly expensive, to the tune of $2,000 to $5,000 a month.
Wow.
There is just a lot of problems that get in the way of people accessing timely and affordable care. And there are not great answers. There are some places where there's scholarships available. There are some people that do trans care in free clinic settings. There are, if you can travel, sometimes it's about not knowing where there's care. So if you can find a place where you can go, but there's not a great answer for people who can't afford the care. That's the reality.
And how long is the treatment? Because you would sometimes have to travel once a month then, right?
So at least in the first year that people are either undergoing hormone treatment or blockers, they will come to my clinic every 3 months for the first year. And then after that, it's spaced out a little bit longer. So it is going to be, yeah.
When we think of California, though, I'm from Northern California, and when I transitioned in Northern California as an adult who did have some resources, I could not find any medical care geographically where I was. I had to drive 4 hours every weekend to get the care that I needed. And so I think we get kind of lulled into the idea that California is Southern California, and even with the Affordable Care Act and increase in awareness and services, there are huge swaths of this state where people are not able to get care despite living in the state of California. And so sort of what Joe was saying is that the internet has become an amazing resource for information, albeit sometimes inaccurate information, but information nonetheless, and also a great place of support. That if you are a kid who lives in somewhere in Northern California or somewhere in the South, and you're having a hard time finding in-person community, connecting to that young person in Australia or Germany or in the town next to you can be a lifeline. It can be a very important resource, and parents get information around resources as well through the internet. So the internet was a game changer for trans care.
So I'm so excited to have live with us Sarah McBride, and you are National Press Secretary for the Human Rights Campaign. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for being on. And we would like to talk to you a little bit about the legal issues that our transgender youth face today. What do you think are some of the biggest issues?
Well, I'll first start by saying that I think we've seen some incredible progress over the last several years on trans equality, particularly when it comes to people knowing someone who's transgender, opening their hearts and changing their minds. We've seen progress in a number of states in making sure that schools are more accessible, that students can be affirmed in their identity. But of course, we are seeing some significant challenges. The recent election of Donald Trump as president really changed the legal landscape nationwide in some fundamental ways. This past month, the Trump administration rescinded life-saving guidance that helped protect transgender young people in public schools across the country. We are seeing the federal government not as willing to step up and defend the rights of transgender people throughout daily life. And that really puts a target on the back of a lot of transgender people, and particularly transgender young people, who are already facing bullying, already facing discrimination from several state legislatures. And now that the Trump administration has sort of turned their back on those young people, it presents a lot of new challenges.
It's outrageous.
It really
is. You guys, what do you see? How do you see it affecting the transgender community?
I think certainly the young people that are in my practice have a lot of anxiety and fear about what all of this means, how it's going to look for them over time. Because we're in California, I think we have a little bit different relationship with safety, or our feeling that California will step up and have the backs of young people. But I do think that there's a tremendous amount of anxiety about things that are enacted on a federal level, like document changes, for example, like the capacity to get a passport in the correct gender marker. And if young people are thinking about traveling out of state for school, what are the implications for them in those domains? I think even broader than that is our healthcare access issues. So regardless of what state you're in, if there's a restructuring of healthcare that results in millions of people losing access to care, many of our families are not going to have the capacity to be able to seek medical intervention.
So, I mean, I didn't realize this until yesterday, what big thing it is to be able to change your name and your birth certificate and your passport, and even having the right to have change your name at your school, in the school roster. So what are the laws for transgender kids?
Well, one of the first major advancements we saw during the Obama administration on transgender rights was the updating of a policy by the US State Department that allowed transgender people to update their gender on their passports, which is really the main documentation that the federal government has direct control over. When it comes to driver's license for folks who are older than 16, when it comes to birth certificates, those policies change really state by state. Some states are really advanced when it comes to those documentations. Other states still require a lot of burdensome requirements when it comes to updating those types of documentation. Some states actually don't even allow you to, for instance, update your birth certificate even today. But states like California have really been on the forefront of making sure that transgender students, transgender young people, transgender people in general, can make sure that they have their names and their genders reflected on documentation. And one of the reasons why that's so important for transgender young people in particular is that if you have a legal name on a class roster, or if you have a gender reflected in any kind of school documentation, if that doesn't reflect the true gender of that child, the gender identity of that child, it could effectively out the child to classmates, to faculty, to staff, to their peers, in a way that could really put them at greater risk of bullying or harassment. So it's about both affirming and respecting the person's identity, but it's also about making sure that they're safe from any kind of harassment, making sure that their privacy is respected, and that the transgender person can be in charge of that information. We do see a lot of folks that are worried about whether the State Department's going to change and roll back the progress we saw under the Obama administration when it comes to passports. It's really too early to know whether those policies are going to change. We haven't seen much action on that front yet. But it's also important to note that even for students who don't find themselves in states with explicit protections like California or my home state of Delaware, that regardless of what the Trump administration has done when it comes to rolling back that guidance, transgender people, and particularly transgender students, do remain protected under federal civil rights laws. There are decades now of case law that hold that federal sex protections include gender identity. And so if a transgender student is discriminated against in school, regardless of the state they live in, they can file complaints. Now, the federal government's executive branch might not have their back, but they can still file complaints. They are still protected.
So in closing, what can we do as parents to support the transgender community and the laws? What could a normal person do?
Well,
Who do we
I think
call?
a
Who
person
do we
who's not
complain to?
transgender and a person who is transgender for that matter as well can certainly call their school districts. Make sure that the school districts are affirming and welcoming. Make sure they have themselves explicit and clear protections from discrimination. Make sure that transgender young people can use facilities and access programs consistent with their gender identity. So certainly call your school district, make sure that they know that they need to have explicit protections if they don't. A number of states are considering anti-LGBTQ and anti-transgender bills in particular. In those states, people should call their legislators, make sure they know that their constituents oppose any kind of discriminatory law. And obviously, more broadly, we need people to step up, make sure that their neighbors and their community members know that they are allies to transgender people, that they stand with transgender people, and that whatever comes our way, whether it's progress or whether it's continued attacks by people like Donald Trump, that there are millions of Americans who stand with the community.
Thank you so much for being with us here today, and please keep us posted. We'd like to keep our parents and our community abreast if there's ever you need to get people out to vote or you need to get people involved to support.
We certainly will, and there's going to be a lot coming moving forward, so we will definitely let you know.
And thanks again for your time.
Thank
so nice
you.
to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Bye, Sarah. So if you like this show and you like to support Kids in the House, you can buy a premium subscription for $4.99. And the code to get a special deal is right here. And let's see some footage about our premium subscription.
Parenting is not easy, and you could always use the extra help. Kids in the House has over 500 best-selling authors, doctors, and experts, all at the touch of your fingertips, providing the answers and insight when you need it.
With over 9,000 videos, if you've got a question, Kids in the House has got the answer.
Premium subscription includes tons of exclusive videos.
Baby Care 101, the ultimate baby manual.
The class you take before having a baby.
Premium-only live broadcasts.
The top 10 parenting tips from leading experts.
Parenting advice you can't miss.
The ultimate teenage manual.
Surviving the teenage years.
How-to videos.
Funny, entertaining videos parents can relate to.
Our premium exclusive TV series, along with access to all of our experts. Get instant access today to the premium content parents need.
Oh yeah, we shine like stars.
Be a parenting superstar today by subscribing to our premium content.
Oh yeah, we shine
Inspire,
Educate,
entertain.
like stars.
Kids in the House.
So now we're actually going to meet some transgender kids and their parents. And our first family is Solar Martinez family, and I'm probably butchering their name with my Swedish accent. This is a Spanish name. But they're an incredible family, and here we go. Joining me today is Rosemary and Yulani.
Yeah.
Yulani is a transgender, and you have a very supportive, incredible mother. So nice of you to be here today and share your experience with us and the Kids in the House audience. So, Rosemary, you had to go through a lot of changes in your life to make it right for your child.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to you before, but share to the audience your experience.
Well, coming out, it's very difficult for people to understand what's really going on and what she's going through and what your job is as a parent to do. We didn't have much support with family, so I decided that I would make a move, and if I didn't have the support I needed in my area, that I will find it elsewhere. And we made the move to a different state, and, you know, have different friends and people we consider family now. So, I mean, that was one of the major changes. And then, as well as her appearance now, a lot different than a little boy, you know, so.
What you said to me right before we started was, you know, your job as a parent is to make your child happy. What would you say? So one of the questions we got, several versions of it, is, you know, I kind of feel transgender, but I don't know how to come out.
I will start by like going to trans groups and trying to figure out who you people are, who they are as a person, or how they feel around the people that are feeling the same way. There's like groups like non-binary groups, like they don't really know what's happening, but they know that they feel different than who they are inside. And I just think that transforming families, like the one we've gone to, is great. Really positive vibes.
You can't shut your child, if you shut your child out, that's when they'll go down, you know, that dark road. They're gonna look for it elsewhere, and there's nothing good out there mostly, you know. You have to love your child and accept them, and just, you don't have to understand it. It's just what it is. If you sit there and try to understand it, you probably won't ever get it. But just make sure that they have that safe place, you know.
Actually, kind of gave me the chills, because that applies to a lot of things with parenting.
Like I would just say, like, just listen to your kids and speak with them to know what they feel.
I've always tried to keep that open relationship, you know, just come talk to me about anything. If you're gonna talk to somebody, let it be me. We'll deal with it afterwards. I'm not gonna be angry that they're choosing to tell me certain things, especially when it comes to this. So when she did come to me, I felt good as a parent, because I'm like, okay, I'm doing my job, and she feels comfortable enough to let me know, which means that she knows that I'm gonna do the right thing, and that's what I did.
Well, you're lucky to have such a great mom.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here today, for your time. And
no problem.
So very honored to meet both of you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sola Martinez family, for being here and really highlighting to us some of these struggles these families has to go through to move to a different part of the country to get treatment for the kids, what the sacrifice it is. How common is that you have to move?
It's very common that families will relocate physically, either their entire family, or take the kid out of a school, or make some other major adjustment so that a young person has a healthier environment to be in, or can have access to care. I think that's very common, but I think, again, speaking about resources or people's capacity to do that is very different across different families. And I think all the time about, even though we have a very large program, we are only seeing a fraction of the young people that actually need care and are not getting it.
So what do you think the statistics are, A, on how many transgender kids there are in our country, and B, on the lack of treatment?
I think it's my stance on this is what it always has been, is that trans adults started as trans kids, and our recent estimations about prevalence are about 0.7% is the most recent that has come out. And
so 0.7%.
Correct. That's the most recent statistic from the Williams Institute about the prevalence.
And how common is it that kids are born with both gender?
Kids who identify as non-binary or third gender, something like that. There's not great data on that. I have heard people talk about their own clinical experience, it being from 3% to 10%, even sometimes 30%. I think it's difficult because kids with young people, particularly with non-binary identities, so I don't identify as a girl or just a boy. I identify as either some combination of that or something else entirely. For young people can sometimes be a stepping stone toward more masculine or more feminine, and it's sometimes a landing place. So I think it's very difficult if you ask that question of people at one point in time that may not necessarily reflect the entirety of what their experience is around their gender.
So now we're going to meet another family. the McMaster family, and they are a little bit of a different story because their child, Scott, did a very early transition. So let's hear Scott's story. So I'm here today with Scott, Stephanie, and Scott. So nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Your son is transgender.
Yes.
And when did you know you were transgender, Scott?
It wasn't really like this one moment. It was kind of like this feeling throughout my life, like I'm a dude. Like there was never a moment in my life where I was like, no, I'm a girl. I was always a dude.
And when did you guys know?
We suspected early on the way that he played with other children, the toys that he preferred, mostly unwillingness to wear certain clothing, but...
And we didn't really,
No,
had not been
yeah.
exposed to the word transgender yet. We didn't know that there was even a possibility or that what that even was. We thought maybe we had a tomboy. We thought that, and as crazy as it seemed, not really knowing the difference between gender expression and your sexual preference, that we thought maybe that my 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old was maybe gay, or was maybe a lesbian, because we just didn't have the words or the knowledge to kind of explain how our kid acted. We still didn't know what to do. We were still filling it out. We were only in preschool at the time. Gone to kindergarten, and we really realized that something, like we need to do something. We didn't know what though. We didn't know what the next step was. And we got really lucky. Scott got really lucky. My wife talked to a friend of hers who happened to have a brother that was transgender. And so we got in contact with him. He was able to give us the information to get a hold of his therapist, who was Susan Landon. And so we went and met with Susan and told her what was going on. And she's like, Scott's definitely transgender. Like, okay, great. What do we do with that information? And so she walked us through, and I go, look, we're getting ready to start school. And she's like, okay, we can go to the school, we can change the name, we can do these kind of things. And she's like, well, when does school start? I said, in about 3 days. So we had, she had a reference for us. We had an advocate come with us to the school, sit down with the school, told the school what was going on. The school didn't want to use the name. They wanted to use the name that was on the birth certificate. She firmly but politely told them that that's not what the state of California requires, that you will use the name of the child's choice.
This advocate came to our house on Tuesday, met with the school, met with our family. We were told to allow our child to choose a new name, which concerned us. We weren't sure what he was going to come up with. But within a matter of 3 days, just a simple phone call that we had made went from being what the school wanted us to use, which was on the birth certificate, to a name that our child had chosen, that Scott had chosen himself.
And that made a big difference for you. We spoke before, so I know this, that you actually started out as Scott in your school. So
Yeah.
for a long time, nobody knew. You came out like much later.
Yeah, I came out 13 years after actually transitioning because I was so...
7 years.
7 years.
Yes, 7 years, when you were 13.
When you were 13, yeah.
Right. But I went under the radar because I didn't know how other people would react to me being trans, so I just wanted to be a boy. Like, I didn't want to be that kid. I wanted to just be a boy, so... When I came out initially, I made sure I was surrounded by people who loved me and didn't care.
Well, it's your story and your story to tell when you want to tell your story.
Yeah.
So Scott transitioned at 6 years old, and it seemed like that was a lot smoother, and went through the whole school until he was 13, and then he, when he was ready, came out as a transgender. Is that common?
Yeah, I think it's common that there's a strong desire to be able to experience life as sort of a gender that you've always known yourself to be. And so it's not uncommon for kids who transition young, like Scott did, to really spend a great deal of time not wanting to be the trans kid in school. And people can rally around that and make a lot of decisions around supporting that. And I think that there's another side that has to also be understood and valued, is that it's an exchange of secrets in some ways. So before you come out, the secret is that you're trans. And after you come out, the secret is that you're trans. And so there's anxiety and there's all sort of uncertainty. And I think Scott said that a little bit around, you know, he didn't know how his peers at school would react. And so that gets internalized, and that also impacts people. And I'm not suggesting that everyone should be out, and I'm not suggesting that everyone should not be out. I think that it's really important that each person finds their own path. There's no right path, but there are absolutely, each decision, there's impacts, there's consequences, both positive and negative, for regardless of the trajectory or the path that someone takes. And what I appreciate about Scott really is the factor that what happened for him to decide to come out was the death of Leila Alcorn. When her suicide became public, that really moved Scott in a way of saying, I have resources and I have support, and I feel ready to use those resources and support to advocate to help other people. And that is a really remarkable decision to make for a 13-year-old.
That is a remarkable decision, and the whole family is remarkable.
Yeah.
And we have a long interview with them that we're going to publish. Unfortunately, we could just have a little clip today, but incredible story, an incredible family. So now we're going to talk about another issue, and that's about how much more difficult it could be if you are not, most transgender people here are white. So do you think that minorities experience an even more difficult challenge to transition? And do you think that also, I've heard, there's more violence against them?
Absolutely. I think this is underappreciated, under-talked about. We have this new intervention of puberty blocking for people in early puberty. And what we have seen universally across most of the gender specialty clinics in the United States is that the huge majority, like 90% of the young people that are coming in for that intervention are white.
Wow.
This is
90%.
90%. And this
crazy.
is not representative of the cities that we're talking about. We're talking about very, very racially and ethnically diverse places. And so this is a huge disparity. And we are undertaking endeavors to try and understand that and understand what those potential barriers to access to care are, and how can we address those so that people have equal access, as equal as it can be. But there is no question that trans folks of color are much more likely to experience a whole host of negative things, far more than their white counterparts. So I think those intersectionality of minority race or ethnicity with being trans sets people up for higher incidences of experiencing the inability to finish your education, potentially experiencing homelessness, huge health disparity in accessing care, certainly maintaining employment, and being the victims of physical violence, including murder. And it's specifically bad for trans women of color. And this is something that is really important, that being a trans woman of color is a danger to your health and well-being every single day you walk out your door, and potentially before you walk out your door, because partner violence is huge as well. And so when we talk about protecting this community, our trans women of color are really of utmost importance, the people that we need to be protecting and thinking about at the forefront, and trying to figure out ways to make sure that access to safety, but access to care, is available.
And with that, I would actually like to introduce Andrew Perez, director and producer of American Transition. And what he's trying to do is highlight different culture and different transgender people in the media. So we are going to welcome Andrew Perez. So I'm here with Andre, who is an incredible director, producer of America in Transition, and is also transgender. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us. And I'm so excited to show everybody a little clip from your documentary series. So we're going to start with that, and then we're going to talk with you. So here we go.
Sounds good.
My name is Dejorin Ray Gauthier. I am a transgender model, activist, law student, and business owner. Modeling for me is way more than me smiling on a magazine. I'm smiling for kids that are afraid.
What do you take shots for?
For me to grow my beard.
But you're already growing your beard.
I know.
I don't understand that. Why?
I have to have it continue to grow. If I don't keep doing it, then these will just like, they'll trickle away. I remember calling her. She seemed kind of weak on the phone or, like sad. I could just hear it in her voice. And I'm like, hey mom, what's up? And she was like, they've diagnosed me with cancer.
And you always like to hug and kiss me on my face.
I did. One of the most difficult things throughout our lives together was transitioning and kind of coming out for us to...
It took a lot of time.
It took a lot of time.
It was painful to me and it was devastating.
Never could have made it without you. I would have lost it all. But now I see how you were there for me. Oh.
A lot of parents, when their kids are any type of LGBTQ, they are like, oh, where did I go wrong? It's like, wait a minute, you did it.
So America in Transition, that's a beautiful clip, and I am looking forward to see the rest. And one of the things you focus on is that usually when we see a transgender person in media, it's a white person. And this makes it even harder for minority transgender people to come out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I myself am Puerto Rican. I'm mixed. I'm Puerto Rican and white. And I think about what it was like for me to try to come out to my Puerto Rican family. And I was really scared. I had a lot of assumptions about what that might be like and how they might respond, which I now realize were really just based on this kind of stereotype or generalization about Latino communities being really homophobic, being really sort of machismo, right? But that wasn't how it was at all, right? And, I think that the reality is trans people make up, according to the most recent polls, 1.5% of the population. And so the reality is most people don't know that they've met a trans person or may only have one trans person in their life. So the power of media to shape how people think about the trans community is profound. So when we have these really narrow subsection of the community represented, it doesn't speak to so many people's experience. And then being trans is kind of labeled as like a white phenomenon. And the reality is there are trans people, and there have been trans people in every society, in every culture, and there's this idea almost that it's a contradiction in terms to be trans and Muslim or to be trans and Latino. But the reality is, like I said, the trans people are part of every community. And that it kind of shapes how you can even be as a trans person, right? The kind of culture and space that you're in, whether that's religious, how your family thinks and feels about you. So one of my missions is showing trans people from all walks of life and all backgrounds and cultures. And that's a really important part of what makes America in Transition new and different than the kinds of media that's come before about the trans community.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'm looking forward to see America in Transition when it's finished.
Absolutely.
It's a great project. So what are some of the psychological issues a transgender person has to deal with?
I think most of it is framed around what is the current existing diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And gender dysphoria is both a tool that is in the diagnosing of mental health and the medical care, but it most accurately describes the distress that comes with people's secondary sex characteristics. But gender dysphoria is actually much more complex than that, and it's the experience of ongoing strategies and decision making to address the discomfort and the incongruency, and so that can show up in a lot of ways for folks. But largely, it's kind of accommodating everyone else around you to try to ease their discomfort with something that is causing great discomfort for yourself. So gender dysphoria is what is used to describe a set of experiences, but it's also the tool that's used to diagnose both within medical care and mental health care about those experiences.
Very interesting. And with this, we're going to actually see a little clip from a camp for transgender kids.
Camp was an opportunity for me. It was a place where I could forget about my anxieties. It was a place where I could feel like I wasn't alone. I could meet other kids who were just like me.
The purpose of Camp Aeronautic is just for kids to be able to be themselves and not worry about who they are or having to answer questions about themselves, just to be kids.
And I didn't have to worry about getting bullied, or I didn't have to worry about just not being myself. And what that did for me was phenomenal.
Camp Aeronautic never turns away a child and can provide financial help for those in need. Last year, they gave away $60,000 in aid just for the summer. For more information, go to www.campaeronautic.org.
So that must be an incredible experience for a transgender kid to come to a camp with only transgender and just be themselves.
I think it's amazing. I'm so grateful for Camp Aeronautic because it's not just allowed a young person to go and have a great time, a summer experience, but it's also allowed kids to connect together. And I think that some of the young people in my practice, they make lifelong friends at Camp Aeronautic. And that's really sometimes the first time that trans kids have made lifelong friends.
And it's also, camp can also be a very difficult place because there is issues of disclosure. Parents sort of feel nervous, concerned about their kid going to camp, and if the camp counselors don't know that their kid's trans, or the peers don't know that they're trans, it's concerning, and sometimes the decision is just to not let their kid go to camp. So for a lot of these kids, it's the only camp that they're ever going to be able to go to their entire life, and it's such a sentinel experience for them.
So I have one last question for you guys. So what happens, what's the difference and what has happened when kids are born with genitals that are with both, or they look different, or how is that connect to be transgender? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's often a lot of mix-up between what we term intersex situations or intersex conditions, differences of sex development, which is sort of an umbrella term for a huge number of things that happen in between, let's say, chromosomes and reproductive tract and genitals. There are 140 different identified situations whereby babies are born, and not always identified in early infancy, but sometimes later on, where there are enzymatic deficiencies or overages, chromosomal situations, where people might be born with ambiguous genitalia, where it's not identifiable. Is this a penis and testicles and a scrotum, or is this a vagina and vulva, where more exploration has to happen? I think where there's overlap with the trans community is if you consider transgender as an umbrella term for anyone who has a gender different than the assigned sex they were given at birth, you can easily see how there might be overlap, because for folks with intersex situations, they are assigned a sex or gender at birth, usually by the medical team. I think this is changing a lot now, but historically, these young people or these babies are assigned a sex at birth based on some real and some not so real evidence. And there are occasions when those young people feel like a different gender than the sex they were assigned, or potentially third gendered or agender or something entirely different than male or female. And so there's overlap with the community because of that.
So thank you so much, both of you, for being here today. And I'd like to see if you have any closing comments that you want to add in. And if not, I would love for you just to share how we can get a hold of you. And if you have any other resources you briefly want to mention, we're going to put them on the website later too in more detail. But,
I think that it's really important now more than ever that people become active allies. I think that it's a very dangerous time, certainly probably the most dangerous time for trans youth and trans folks of any age since I've started doing this work. And I think that speaking up and protecting the safety of trans folks is really important now. I'm very, very easy to find. I work at Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. My contact information is available on our website. People can email me, people can call me. I'm absolutely open to answering questions.
I think that I occupy an interesting role as both a trans person and a provider of services. And so I'm going to actually sort of speak from like a personal perspective, is that we even heard in some of the questions today that parents are very worried and concerned about both what's happening right now, but the outcome. And we sometimes focus too heavily on what happens that is not positive. And I think it's very valuable to also put out a message that you support your kids and your kids can thrive and your kids can be amazing, wonderful, loving, and loved human beings. And it's important that we also focus really heavily on that. And that because I've been supported and loved and have an amazing spouse and partner, my life is actually really fantastic and thriving. And I think parents need to hold on to that and not just the fear. Los Angeles Gender Center, we've been around for 30 years and we've been doing this work in long before other people were doing the work. And you can find us at lagendercenter.com, and it has my contact information as well as my colleagues. And also Transforming Family is a family support group, and we'll make sure you get that information to put up as well.
Thank you so much. And yes, that is so true. You know, the kids that have been supported by their parents, they seem like very, very happy, kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the research is bearing out too, and I think that's really exciting. That the research is showing that that trans kids, even the youngest of our young people under 12 years old, are, if they're supported and they're listened to and heard and acknowledged, that they are thriving, and that's really new. I think that's exciting. That's good information, and I'm so happy. I'm beyond thrilled that parents have made so much of a move closer to listening to their young people and helping them live healthy and happy lives.
Which is one of the messages when I interviewed you the first time, Joanna, is on Kids in the House. You said something, the most important thing you can do for a child is to allow them to be exactly who they are. Mm-hmm. And that goes for every parent. You know, we all have a tendency to either have a shy child or whatever it is, to just allow your child to be who they are. Thank you so much for being with us today at Kids in the House live broadcast, and stay tuned for many more to come. Over now from Kids in the House.